Okay, students, so as promised, here is a revision video on the corpus for AS language, the long answer, that's D. So I've already done a separate video on A to C, the short answer questions. This is a revision video on the long answer, that's the D answer, okay? So once you've done your short answer questions, you should take about 20 minutes, something along those lines. You're going to get a long answer question. It's going to be framed something like this. So it's based on a corpus. What I've done here is I've taken the 4 texts that we use for the short answer questions, that mini little corpus, and added another one just so I can make it a little bit easier to spot patterns and things like that. But of course, the real corpus in the exam would be longer. This is just I don't have space to actually do that in a short video. So I've got 5 texts when you're more likely to have 10. Okay, but the long answer question it takes about half an hour, 35 minutes at most, really. It's always framed something like this: analyze and evaluate the ways opening lines of poems engage their readers. So the corpus here is opening lines of poems, and the long answer will always be analyze and evaluate the way in which this genre here, it's poetry, engages the readers or influences the readers. So something to do with purpose is also always what the question, I guess spell the word purpose there. Something to do with purpose. So not a simple purpose, but like, in form or something, but something to do with the purpose of these texts. And they'll also give you some bullet points which you absolutely have to address during the course of your answer. So that would be like context. So that would be things like genre, audience, subject, purpose, context, things along those lines. The situation, tenor, and effective lexical choices. So literally the words, why those words, and how that helps to meet the purpose. Tenor, like the tone of the pieces, the relationship with the audience, with the reader. Form and structure, they might say this now, that covers things like both grammar but also like organisation. So here for poetry, obviously there are line breaks and things along those lines, and if you know any poetic terms that might be helpful, but things like the way in which the lines are organised, and of course similarities and or differences. So it is inviting you to discuss the similarities and differences. Now there's a lot to do there in half an hour, but the basic sort of premise of what we're doing is it's an analysis of the whole corpus. It's the corpus as examples of that genre. So it's really important that we think about what the purpose and what the texts are before we begin to do that section D question. So here we've got the opening lines of poems. Okay, so you really need to take a couple of minutes to have a think about, okay, so what are poems and what are the opening lines of poems supposed to do? What's the point of them? How do they operate? What's the point of them? How do they work? Okay, and then have a look again right across the corpus and think, what patterns can I spot? What tends to be coming across quite often in that corpus? Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through them again and think about that question. How do they engage their readers? What are they doing to engage their readers? Okay, the owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note. Well, that to me seems to engage the reader by being a bit fantastical, a bit weird, a bit interesting, maybe a little bit of imagery going on there, and appealing to perhaps a childlike audience in some sort of way. So I'm just thinking about, well, okay, what's it doing in sort of general terms, before I get to too much terminology, what is it doing to engage the reader? Okay, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, what's that doing to engage the reader? Well, to grab their attention in that way. Well, it seems to be quite down to earth, doesn't it? Keep your head and you, it's direct towards, so maybe there's something going on there. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. So this sort of romantic poem here, how does that engage the reader? Well, the reader there seems to be a particular sort of person, doesn't it? And saying, I love you so much more than this and this and this, more than my soul can reach. So maybe there's a way of engaging there by being really over the top in some way. And then the Robert Burns dialect poem, fair for you on a sonsy face, great chieftain of the puddin' race. This address to a haggis. Well, clearly there's something weird going on engaging the reader there in terms of the use of this particular dialect. You just don't see that very often. And then half a league, I've added this one, so there's more to say about the corpus. Half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Well, that one, it seems to be, engaging the reader. Well, some certain phrase, valley of death, repetition of half a league. So we can see that they all are engaging the reader. That's fine. But what we need to do is spot patterns amongst that corpus, the patterns of the types of things that we do in order to engage the reader. Okay, so the way I plan it is I would think of something along the lines of like an inverted triangle, something like that, okay, with a little overview on top. So you don't have to actually draw one of these, you probably won't have time, but the way I think about how we get on with doing this question. So we've got a little short overview to start with, focus on the purpose and context and that sort of genre issue. So for that overview, we're looking at sort of, the genre, how does it generally tend to meet purpose and context? What you want to show here is that I understand what the point of opening lines of poems are. Okay, so really thinking about that genre, what's the point of it? What does it try to do? Well, the purpose is not simple, is it, with poetry? But maybe it's things like create sort of a thoughtful sort of relationship, being quite thoughtful, quite emotional often in poetry, isn't it? Emotions. The context is usually you read poetry like either in class with a teacher, or more often it's something to be read very personally in some sort of way. It might even be a direct. Yeah, the start of a poem has to establish something like a memorable line in some way. It's just a way of thinking, well, what is the point of poetry in general, okay? And also, if you think about poetry, it sometimes rhymes, doesn't it? Sometimes rhymes, or might be sort of what we call like lyrical or something along those lines. Now, it doesn't matter what genre you get, you just need to have a couple of minutes, a couple of thoughts about, well, what is the point of this genre? What makes it what it is? What's normal for that type of genre? So if it was advertising, for example, you'd say, well, the point of the opening lines of advertisements would be to grab the reader's attention and to make the product look good. If it's poetry, it's not to make any product look good. It might be something like to, I don't know, make people think, or add some sort of emotion, or express feelings, something like that, express feelings. So I just want maybe a few sentences to show I understand what the point of poetry is and the context in which sort of people sort of read poetry, or whatever the genre is. And then in my answer, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to address those 4 bullet points. Now these sometimes change. These sometimes aren't always the same bullet points, but they're always going to be something like this. Context, of course, that's just how you're going to explain the context of the genre or the audience. The tenor will be like the relationship with the reader, or the sort of like the tone of the piece, and the effect of lexical choices, the choices of the words. Form and structure is like the sentences, but also the lines, but also the organisation of those lines, and then the similarities and differences, the patterns amongst the corpus. Okay, so for this one here, I've got this sort of inverted triangle approach, and that's basically from something that sort of they all or most have, down to some exceptions down here. So something that's interesting, but only in perhaps one of them. Okay, so for all or most of them down to exceptions. So I'd have like all of them or most of them have got this feature, okay? And then maybe sort of some of them have got this feature, even quantify that. Some of them, all of them have got this, some of them have got that. Or sort of perhaps what they might do is, some do it this way, others do it another way. So if we're thinking about what that it is, what is it that they do? So perhaps some of them, create this sense of emotion one way, others create it another way. So there's differences, but there's also similarities. That's really trying to address this bullet point here. They're not all simply different. They're not all completely different. They're trying to use similar things, but in different ways. One perhaps does it in this way, another one does it in another way. Okay? And then sort of a minority of texts. Minority of the texts do something. Okay, or any interesting exceptions or anomalies within the corpus, like something a bit weird or odd or I wouldn't expect. Okay, so we're going to try and sort of address those bullet points. And just in my own head, I'm thinking, right, I've got to start with a nice overview, show I understand the genre, but really, really important when I'm thinking about what patterns to spot, I want some stuff that's basically in all of them, some stuff that's in some of them, I want some stuff that's sort of the same thing done in different ways, and I want some stuff that's sort of only in a minority and maybe even one exception. So just that I'm thinking of like something across the board down to some exceptions. So let's flip back over and see what I can spot. Okay, so see the types of things I can spot in D. Okay, in the corpus. Right, so something they've all got, or the vast majority of them have got would be how I'd start this, okay? Something that the vast majority, just looking at the vast majority, a feature that matters to poetry. Well, thinking about what do poems tend to do? What do they tend to be involved? Well, they tend to be quite emotional and over the top, don't they? So I'd start with something like hyperbole, okay? So start with something that seems to be over the top in all of them. Okay, well look, depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. Using this lexical field to create this sense of hyperbole, this OTT love here, okay? So I've got hyperbole in this one, okay? What about this one? Fair for your own sons you face, great chieftain, the pudding race. Well, look at the exclamative there, a great chieftain. This is OTT, so we've got hyperbole in that one as well. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Well, that's a bit OTT as well, isn't it? So that phrase, valley of death, that sort of imagery we've got being hyperbole over there, okay? What about this one? If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, losing your head, blaming it on you, is that OTT? Well, it seems to be, doesn't it? So that seems to be, again, a form of hyperbole. It's a slightly different form because this is more like sort of a saying and an idiom, and it's quite colloquial. Over here, it's quite romantic. Over here, it's really sort of direct and strange, and over here, it's very dark and disturbing, which only leaves this one. The Island of the Pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note. Now, I wouldn't say it was hyperbole necessarily, but it's doing something similar, isn't it? So maybe it's just a bit strange, or maybe there's some use of imagery there. So already I can do like the broad top bit of an analysis after my overview. I can go, well, look, almost all the texts, if not all the texts, use a form of hyperbole, and then I'd give my examples. So, I'd number them. So, in text 3, for example, this hyperbole is quite romantic and uses this lexical field of measurement and references to souls, which is quite a romantic style. The hyperbole in text 5 is very, very dark, using negative imagery and valleys of death. Hyperbole in number 4 is based on this use of I dialect and this exclamative and this direct address, calling something a chief. And in 2, it's a much more idiomatic form. It's quite sort of down to earth and colloquial, but it's still over the top. We don't see direct hyperbole in 1, however, we see something else to meet that sort of criteria to be a little bit hyperbolic, which is the use of imagery and fantasy elements, which is in keeping with the fact it's for children. You don't want to make it too scary if it's for children. So that's the type of thing I'd start with, something along those lines, okay? So I'm already addressing context. I'm thinking about those audiences and how it's being done. I'm thinking about lexical choices and why those words and not other ones. I haven't quite thought about structure necessarily yet, but I am definitely thinking about similarities and differences. So the next bit is something that's in some of them, but not in all of them. Some features that seem to be across the board. So, and think about, again, that genre. Well, the stereotype of poetry is that it rhymes, doesn't it? There's one of the things we expect of the genre is that it rhymes. But look at the data and say, is that true? Does it do what I expect of the genre? So if it's advertising, for example, does it do what you expect advertising to do? Do all of them do it, or just some of them do it? So let's see. Well, we've clearly got a sense of rhyme in number 1. Yeah, we've definitely got a very clear sense of rhyme, which is end stop line, rhyming at the end of the lines here, isn't it, at the end? And what else have we got? A little bit of sort of assonance, depth and breadth, that type of rhyme over here. So we've got rhyme there. We've got assonance here, half a league, half a league, half a league onward, or the Valley of Death, Road the 600. Yes, absolutely, okay. So again, a little bit of sort of half rhyme or assonance at the end of there. And what about this one? Well, it's nearly rhyme, isn't it? It's just that they've repeated the exact same word. So some of them use full rhyme and others use half rhyme. So that would be my next thing to go to. And then again, I would try and explain it in context. Well, we tend to see rhyme in ones that are creating quite a sort of simplistic image for children. Yeah, we tend to see direct repetition that's not a full rhyme, but it's just the same word repeated at the end of lines when it's trying to be quite direct. We'd see rhyme here in this one, maybe to add a sort of spoken quality. And we see the assonance in ones that are being perhaps a little bit more emotive or emotional in some sort of way. Okay, let's get on to something then that would be in some of them, or what we said next was like something used in one way in some of them and another way, it does it in a different way in something else. So I'd perhaps talk about looking at this something like repetition. Okay, so let's think about repetition. What sort of repetition have we got? Let's have a look at number 2. We've got repeated use of second person pronoun. Okay, your head, determiner, and you, so we've got the repetition there, okay? What about this one? How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. How I love thee to the breadth, well, something's been repeated, hasn't it? Thee, the archaic second person pronoun. Okay, what about repetition over here in number 5? Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So we can repeat words in some of them. And in this one over here, we've got a repetition of a phrase, haven't we? We've got a repetition of half a league, like a measurement phrase, half a league, this archaic thing. Oh, I could have another one there, couldn't we? Archaic Lexis. We could have that as a little pattern as well. So this is something that some of them have got, this use of repetition, okay, of different ones. But like I say, not all of them have got it. So let's think about what the repetition is for. So the repetition here of you and thee makes it very direct. The repetition over here perhaps gives it a sort of lyrical or rhyming quality or a sense of a drumbeat or a rhythm in some sort of way. Well, maybe they do other things in other poems for a different purpose. So if it's about being really, really direct, this is actually directed to a haggis in this one, isn't it? So we see second person pronouns. This one is addressed to a haggis. So it does it in a different way. It directly speaks using the determiner here rather than the pronoun. Okay, what about this one? Well, it doesn't sort of necessarily have much of repetition, but it does have a nice simplistic sort of structure. Oh, it does have repetition of rhyme here, doesn't it? So we could have used that for the other one as well. Boat and note the sort of repetition of sounds. Honey and money, repetition of sounds. So it's doing something different. It's not repeating a particular word, but it's perhaps a particular sound. And then I just look at something that is sort of like weird and unusual that doesn't seem to happen in any other ones. And of course, it would be this one here. This one here seems to be an exception. So I'd finish off with, something that's not in the text very often, or seems to be not a particularly common feature. It's only in perhaps one interesting exception, is this use of dialect, this use of sort of I dialect and sociolect. But then we could say, number 2 has got a bit of an idiom and a bit of a spoken quality to it, but the only one that sort of really is not written in sort of standard English would be number 4. Okay, so we've spotted some patterns. Let's just think about what we do with them. So let's see what we've got. Sorry, apologies for the very amateurish use of the tripod here. Right, let's go back. Let's think about what we've got. Stop shaking now. There we go. Stable tripod. So we've done our overview. What do the opening lines of poems tend to do? They're quite emotional, like express feeling. They establish a memorable line, and they sometimes rhyme. It's important because people are reading on their own, and you want to grab them and express feelings, etc. So I'd look at most of them. Well, I've got that hyperbole, haven't I? I give some examples. Some of them, we've got this sense of rhyme. We've got this sense of some do it this way, others do it another way. Well, we could have both the rhyme and the repetition over here for that, couldn't we? Some use it this way, some will use it another way. A minority of texts use sort of second person pronouns, don't they? And then any exceptions or anomalies would be this use of sort of I dialect. Okay? And as I'm going through, I'm just giving lots and lots of examples from the texts, and I might even quantify it. So, some of them, or 75% of them, or about half of them, or less than half of them, or the minority of texts, or only one of the however many there are, do this. And then we just explain in context of how it's engaging a particular reader, what the relationship is like, and of course we're already talking about similarities and differences. Okay, so hopefully that's a bit of use for you there about how we go about doing a long answer question for D, spotting patterns and trying to think of it in terms of this sort of inverted triangle way, from all, some, one way and a different way, or one does it this way and another, down to sort of minorities and exceptions like that.